Hello, welcome Esther Friend. I'm so excited to have you here. Esther is the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Solutions for Home Advisor. And sounds like a really interesting role. I'm super curious about how you got into this role and kind of what your day-to-day looks like.
Sure. So actually the role is, I feel very fortunate to be in this role because it's really blending all the things that I love the most. But I came to this role when we merged with Angie's List. So Home Advisor and Angie's List formed a new company called Angie Home Services. From a consumer standpoint, you would still see the brands out there, obviously, Home Advisor or Angie's List.
Okay.
But I was with Angie's List prior to the merger and had a lot of focus on transforming the systems that our internal end users were using for their sales workflows, service workflows, and a lot of focus on those technologies and tools, and really redesigning the workflows and aligning the process with the business goals that we had. And so when we merged companies, there was a great opportunity to take a more expanded role, to do a similar type of role for Home Advisor, but also serving a broader constituency. So I'd previously been focused primarily on sales and service and marketing, and kind of expanded into other arenas. So now I also own the team that's focused on our CRM that we've developed in-house, and how we're doing even back-end billing and things like that, and the end users who are utilizing those systems. So it's a lot of kind of bringing together my background as a business person and someone who led sales teams and service teams, and what the needs of the end users are, especially as it pertains to efficiency and that user experience kind of day in, day out, doing a lot of high volume tasks. And then how do we support them through the tools that they're using to help them be more successful, more efficient, to enjoy what they're doing, and to really make it very workflow focused.
That's cool. You mentioned user experience, and I've heard a lot of talk and seen a lot of reports and interesting articles about focusing on the experience as opposed to sort of just accomplishing a business goal. And maybe you could just share a little bit about how your role has evolved over the years, and thinking more recently about that end user experience.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest macro trends is that now, even toddlers are used to having a good user experience on iPads or devices. And so now when you think about end users, they're also consumers of consumer-facing technology, and they have certain expectations about how things are going to work, and that it needs to be intuitive. Mm-hmm. And so if they're utilizing a system that may have been developed with lots of great data and places for things to be, I want to say a lot of different data, but it's not meant, or it hasn't been created with the idea of a workflow.
Right.
It's going to be very dissatisfying.
Yeah.
And not a great experience for them. And so we really need to rethink, especially when it comes to some of the older applications that we're using, how do we actually redesign to make them more workflow oriented, and really think about what is that user trying to accomplish in the moment. How do we make it easier for them, especially for roles where they're talking on the phone, either selling to a prospective customer or providing service to a customer, that they can have that conversation in a way that the system is helping them versus hindering that conversation. So
right.
I think one of the biggest changes was when you think about more visual workflows from a sales standpoint, having that laid out in a visual path versus it being just in a CRM data fields. So that's something that we've been gradually moving towards, is more of those visual formats, and using things like AI, for example, to provide recommendations. So we're really enhancing their experience. So, if I'm talking to a service provider who's, let's say, a roofer, and he's using leads in a certain task or category, can I actually make recommendations to him as a salesperson or as that service person who's following up, to say, hey, other service professionals like you also would look at adding these tasks, or might expand into this service area. So we can do things on the screen to actually help them be more effective,
cool.
and provide better recommendations to their customers. So that's really been a major focus, is how do we enable them to be more effective and also create a great experience for them when they're working in the solution.
That makes a lot of sense. So Angie's List, I remember back in the day, the book, and you would call, and so And now I'm sure, it's all high tech now, or through
Although people actually still receive the
book. Okay.
book,
So, but the company's clearly gone through a lot of transformation, and I'm curious, especially in your role where you're, assessing those needs and implementing those strategies and dealing with architecting these incredible experiences. You understand what it means to transform, and I'm curious if you have, whether there or just in general, thoughts about what are the keys to successful transformation that maybe businesses aren't thinking about.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest things that we focus on, especially since merging with HomeAdvisor, is really collaborating across the different departments. And there was kind of a delineation at one point between the engineering group that was focused on the consumer-facing website and the service professional business portal, and the folks that were focused on the sales team and marketing team, and it wasn't necessarily very aligned just in terms of how it was working together. So a lot of the major projects over the last year have been really having more coordination and making it something that's very aligned and company focused on the goals that we're trying to achieve as a company. And really the focus for the Angie's List side has really been on demonstrating more value to the service professional and providing them ways to actually see the tangible value that they're getting, as well as then providing a better matching for the consumer. And so that has really become part of a very collaborative focus over the last year, and there's a lot more integration between those systems, so that the rep who's servicing that account is actually seeing the same information that that service professional would see when they log in. And then even just the workflows and how we're selling the product and the systems that we're using to design the advertising packages in the case of Angie's List are much more aligned with that goal of how do we provide the most value for the service professional. So I think that alignment and collaboration is something that has happened quite a bit, and I think there are a lot of trends now around the types of tools that we're using that kind of enable that collaboration. So I'm sure, Slack is something that is pretty pervasive at this point in a lot of companies, but we even have collaboration between the Angie's List and HomeAdvisor development teams, maybe working on separate experiences on the websites, just in terms of consumers going to those disparate websites, but they're collaborating in the Slack channel and leveraging technology across both platforms to provide that experience. So I would say that's really key, but there are a lot of tools that we're using like Slack and Zoom to accomplish that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it makes me think like in an era of kind of collaboration and integration that's needed, I would imagine being around a lot of other peers and people in the space is really valuable. How have you found the Colorado Technology Association conference so far? And
yeah, so I was sharing before this session that this has been one of the best conferences that I've been to, and I think one aspect of it is, obviously when it's more focused on specific to technology versus kind of some of the broader conferences that you have, I think that helps kind of make those conversations that much more relevant. And then also talking to fellow women, because sometimes, we have a pretty diverse workforce as far as women, but sometimes you feel a little bit lonely as a woman in technology, and I've had an unusual path to becoming part of technology where I started off on the business side.
Okay.
So it's been really fascinating for me, and I really appreciate the keynote speaker, Beth, and I've been reading her book, and it was really refreshing to see her viewpoints on change and kind of the failures along the way, and to be very transparent about that she has failed. And when you think about the sides of some of those failures, you think, wow, okay, it's okay to fail. And I feel like I've been someone that's brave and courageous, but it can kind of wear you down when you're the leading voice for sometimes changing the technology dramatically. As part of our merger, we've been consolidating back-end systems, which means sometimes you're picking a winner or loser or something new that's more appropriate for both companies. And so that could be sometimes a tiring process.
Daunting,
Or it's also invigorating when you get out the other side.
Right.
But sometimes you question yourself.
The courage that you have to have. She spoke a lot about the courage.
Well, and I thought another interesting point that she had was sometimes it's the enemies, or the critics that can give you the best feedback that help your project be more successful. And so that's been really relevant to me as I'm thinking about some of the bigger changes that I want to make, and be more mindful that you know, people are giving me valuable feedback that can help me be more successful and not to see it as negative.
Yeah.
So, but to embrace it. So that's a really good mindset shift to have.
No, not yet. Right?
Exactly.
Say not yet instead of no.
Yeah. So what do I need to work on in my argument that helps
get that right
get the
answer
point across?
That's cool. Have any mentors been important to you in your career?
Yeah. So actually, there have been quite a few mentors that have been helpful towards my career. One of my earliest leaders was also a working mom, and that was before I was a working mom. So it was helpful for me to see, okay, when I'm ready to have kids, this is something you can do. You can still be ambitious. You can still be a leader with big responsibilities. And she actually had, her husband was a stay-at-home dad, which was pretty unusual at the time. That was like 20 years ago. And so you didn't see that very often. And so it kind of made it okay for me to even consider that option when a few years later, my husband and I had our first kid when we were living in Singapore.
Oh, wow.
And was like 30 years old, and we're feeling like, well, it's probably time to start a family, but gosh, can we do this? How are we going to do this? We have no family here.
Wow.
And so it was kind of being inspired by her. And then also one of the team members I had on my team had like 4 kids and was a successful working mom. And so that was a great role model for me. And so we kind of took the leap, and my husband's the stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
And has been since my son was born, and he's now coming up on age 14.
Aww.
So my husband's headed up the PTO of our former school and is looking at probably doing something similar here. So that was kind of life-changing for me to see that example.
Right.
And I think it's helpful to see things and go, wow, okay, that's possible.
And believe that you can do that, whatever it is.
Well, and then I also had allies. My boss after that boss was a guy, and he kind of surprised me and took me aback when we talked about my maternity leave, and I was the leader of Asia operations at the time.
Wow.
And felt concerned about could I, take an extended maternity leave, and he encouraged me to take 12 weeks maternity leave and not to be checking in with the office, which I think I did check in some, but not like every day.
Yeah.
And that time was just precious time that really laid the foundation for my son and for him to be a thriving kid. And so I'm really glad that I did that, and I encourage other people to really take that time. But I wouldn't have necessarily embraced that if I hadn't felt like he was encouraging me to do that.
There's some great advocates
Like I probably
out
would
there.
have been at the office a lot more checking on things, and he just encouraged me.
If you were worried, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you weren't.
Yeah.
I can relate to that story. It really means a lot when people support your decisions and encourage you to do everything that you can do.
Yeah.
And that you're capable of, which is amazing thing. So I really appreciate your time today. It was so great talking to you. I could do this a lot longer, but I think
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right.